Now a decade in Iraq is still broken. Is there anyone who supported the war, Fareed, who is suspect, who is credible?
Well, I think that the biggest problem here is that the Bush administration, after the invasion, really exacerbated all these sectarian differences that we're now seeing. So clearly invading Iraq was a mistake. But my point is, in the first month after the invasion, when they were still declaring victory, the Bush administration disempowered the Sunnis and empowered these hardline Shia rulers. So now it's a little odd for people like Vice President Cheney and Paul Bremer, the former viceroy of Iraq, to say, well, we should try to get Maliki to include the Sunnis. Well, you're the guys who put him in power in the first place. You're the guys who disempowered the Sunnis and created or exacerbated these sectarian differences. So it was a very odd critique, given that in many ways there were key policies of the Bush administration right after the invasion that exacerbated these sectarian tensions and the civil war that we are now living with.
Are you surprised? Let me just ask you this. The Paul Bremers, the Dick Cheneys, these people who are coming forward now, A, are you surprised by the fact that they're coming forward, penning these opinion pieces, coming on national TV, and B, no onus?
Well, you'd hope that there would be some sense of, being willing to say, look, we got some things wrong and we got some things right. I look at my own experience with Iraq. I got a bunch of things wrong. I got a bunch of things right. But I think that the odd thing here is all of history begins in 2011 for Dick Cheney, when Obama decides to have the troops withdraw, forgetting that the Bush administration actually negotiated the document that said all U.S. forces would leave Iraq in 2011. That was not Obama. That Obama simply ratified it and continued, in that sense, a Bush administration strategy. So again, it's a sort of strange historical amnesia that forgets that it was George Bush who said all American troops will leave Iraq in 2011.
Fareed Zakaria, always love having you on, your perspective. Thank you so much. Make sure you watch Fareed Zakaria GPS, 10 a.m. Eastern on Sundays, right here on CNN. Appreciate it. We move on. Hour two, top of the hour. I'm Brooke Baldwin, and right about now, President Obama and several congressional leaders are set to discuss the escalating crisis in Iraq at the White House. The question now, will this meeting of the minds, will it end with a U.S. strategy, a specific plan to stop ISIS militants before they reach Baghdad, or will it be mere discussions, consultations? We are hearing the military's top brass, including General Martin Dempsey, have come up with a draft plan, a list of possible ISIS targets and ways to hit them, including dropping precision-guided bombs from manned aircraft. And in Iraq today, the political and economic stakes just got higher for the United States. ISIS militants stormed Iraq's largest oil refinery. This is just north of Baghdad. And at one point, terrorists controlled most of that site. So this is significant here. Also, if you look at the map, and Beiji is the town with that largest oil refinery, but you see the yellow, the southern section of Iraq, oil refineries predominantly in that section of the country. They responded to what's happening in the north very quickly. Oil giants, even before this happened, ExxonMobil, BP began these mass evacuations, fearing for the safety of their own workers. All of this as ISIS moves ever closer to Baghdad. But the word from Iraq's prime minister today is that everything's under control. Joining me now, Dana Bash, our chief congressional correspondent, and Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, retired U.S. Army. Welcome to both of you. And Dana Bash, let me just begin with you, since right around now, this meeting is happening at the Oval Office, not too far from where you are. Do we know, will the president be presenting these top leaders in Congress with a specific plan? Or might he say, we'll put the ball in Congress's court, a la Syria?
Well, it's unclear how specific he's going to get today, but I can almost guarantee you he's not putting any balls in Congress's court right now, particularly when it comes to matters of war, especially on the issue of Iraq, for lots of reasons. First and foremost, Congress doesn't want the ball in their court. You did hear a lot of calls for the president to come to Congress first before any airstrikes in Syria. Not so much now. And I honestly think that the hard, cold truth is because they don't want their hands on it. We are just months before an election day, and they, even those who are probably the most robust in saying that there should be airstrikes, should be a military response, probably wouldn't want to ask their constituents that because they wouldn't agree when they hear the words Iraq and military force. So, but I can say that there certainly is a divide. Not surprisingly, a partisan divide over what to do. Listen to both the House Speaker and the Democratic leader today.
The president's been watching what we've been watching for over a year as the situation in Iraq continued to be undermined. And yet nothing has happened to try to reverse it. I'm hopeful I'll hear something today.
It's not worth the blood of American soldiers. It's not worth the monetary cost to the American taxpayer. So, Mr. President, rather than spending hundreds of billions of dollars, the war in Iraq, about $1.5 trillion, rather than spending more money doing that, fighting George W. Bush's war, how about we use that money to rebuild our nation's infrastructure, roads, bridges.
Now, even though you just heard that from the Democratic leader, and you've heard similar things from Nancy Pelosi, both of whom fought vehemently against the Iraq war towards the end of the Bush administration, they are actually being more cautious than that would appear with regard to, or maybe circumspect is the right word, with regard to airstrikes, because they want to leave options open for the president. But
you mentioned airstrikes in General Kemet. Let me ask you, it depends on which paper you picked up this morning. There were conflicting reports over whether airstrikes would be a viable option or whether that would be scrapped. What about this? What about the do nothing option? Is that viable?
Well, it's viable only if we don't want to have a unitary Iraq state. I think the airstrike options in support of the Iraqi security forces may be one of the best guarantees to keep this country together.
The oil refinery city, the largest in Iraq, in Beji, this is north of Baghdad, taken by ISIS. I've talked to a bunch of people who've been in Iraq as we talk about the southern oil fields. They say no way they could make it down there. But what does that tell you about this strategy from this, not ragtag, quite sophisticated terrorist group?
Well, it looks like rather than try to continue the assault towards Baghdad, they're trying to consolidate their gains that they have made in the north and the west part of the country. That's a predominantly Sunni area. They have the most civilian support in that region. It's highly unlikely that they have either the manpower, the capability, or quite frankly, the desire to go well south into the southern, predominantly, almost exclusively Shia areas.
Okay, and then Dana, to you, as we know with these meetings in the Oval Office, will there be a stakeout camera? Can we assume that we will be hearing from the McConnells, the Pelosi's, the Boehners, the Reids post-meeting?
Some we know already that we're not going to hear from. Mitch McConnell, for example. Others are waiting to see what happens in the meeting. And sometimes we try to read into the fact that they don't come out, that maybe they know something that they simply can't talk about. Other times they actually make a bipartisan agreement just to let the president do his thing. So we're going to wait and see what exactly happens at the end of that. We're not exactly sure.
We'll be watching for it. Dana Bash, General Kemet, thank you both very much. Bottom of the hour, I'm Brooke Baldwin, and let me assure you, we are watching the White House very closely here as we're waiting for word about this high-level meeting, subject Iraq. In the Oval Office, President Obama summoned those 4 leaders of Congress to try to craft a plan to stabilize Iraq and, more immediately, to halt these extremist fighters before they reach the capital city of Baghdad. So let's go back to the map. Here we go. The red dots you see, those are all the different towns in Iraq's Sunni heartland that are believed to be controlled by this Sunni rebel group ISIS. Keep in mind, some of those towns are contested with fighting happening right now, and that includes Kirkuk, the major oil-producing city in the north. We have also gotten word today from military sources that the Pentagon has begun to fly manned reconnaissance missions over Iraq, and a list of possible airstrike targets has landed on the desk of Joint Chiefs Chairman Martin Dempsey. So with me now from New York, CNN military analyst Colonel Rick Francona. And Colonel, welcome back to the show here. Let's begin with airstrikes, because in terms of what they can actually accomplish, we know that they can kill individuals, but could they actually halt the advance of this entire rebel army?
If they can find out where the logistics are and the leading edge of vehicles. I mean, when these people move down these roads, and these are good roads, they move very quickly. And if you can detect them on those roads and you can stop them, air can be very effective in that case. Once they get into the cities, it becomes a whole nother problem because they mix in with the local population, and then you run the risk of inflicting a lot of civilian casualties. So if they can catch them out in the open, yeah, it can be very effective. I'm assuming that that's the kind of targets that they're looking for. These manned reconnaissance aircraft will be able to pick out those moving vehicles.
Have to assume that's something at least being discussed right now at the White House. Two, the issue that we've been talking a lot about today, the fighting for control of Iraq's oil fields, because right now, as we know, we've been looking again at the map, the fighting has been predominantly in the north, whereas most of the oil in Iraq is in the south. Should protecting those oil fields be numero uno as far as priorities for the U.S. military?
Actually not right now. The only real oil facility that's being contested right now is the Beji refinery. Now that's important domestically for the Iraqis. About half of the refined gasoline comes from there. But the major production that impacts the world market is in the south.
Right.
And the northern oil fields in the Kirkuk area are pretty much under control of the Kurds. So the oil is not really the issue right now, but we got to stop these guys from getting to the capital city.
Okay. The U.S. was in Iraq in a combat role, as we well know, 2003 to 2011. Does the U.S. experience in Iraq, would that translate into a benefit for us, militarily speaking? Or since you have this entirely new enemy now, being ISIS, is this a totally new ballgame?
No, it's not a totally new ballgame. It's a different enemy. But we fought these guys before. I mean, the AQI, they're the outgrowth of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They formed the Islamic State of Iraq, and now they've expanded to include that part of Syria up in the north.
But aren't they more extreme?
No, they're the same guys.
Okay.
This is Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They're the same guys. They've gotten a lot better. They've gotten more sophisticated, so it's a different enemy. But we know the terrain, we know the area, and hopefully we can reestablish contact with the Sunnis that supported us in the past. Right now, we have no contacts.
Colonel Rick Francona, thank you so much. Appreciate it. At the White House right now, President Obama is meeting with congressional leaders in the Oval Office, discussing specifically this crisis in Iraq, ways to contain it. Those talks come as ISIS forces launch this bloody attack on Iraq's main oil refinery in the town of Beji. And then there's this. Iraq has now officially asked the U.S. to launch airstrikes against the rebels. Let's go live to Baghdad to Anderson Cooper. And Anderson, the new information, and you know something about this, the investigation into these 59 high-ranking security officials accused of leaving their posts. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you need more evidence of the disarray that Iraqi security forces have been in over the last several days, an announcement made just a short time ago here on Iraqi television by a spokesman for Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister, also who has oversight of military and security forces, announcing investigations into 59 high-level officers of the Iraqi military, also the police services and other high-level officials who abandoned their posts even before fighting began in some of these areas. The fact that in a place like Mosul, it wasn't even a question of Iraqi forces losing on the battlefield, engaging with enemy fighters. They left in the advance before enemy fighters even got to the battlefield, taking off their weapons, dropping their weapons, taking off their uniforms and disappearing, their officers disappearing. So now investigations, according to the Iraqi government, into 59 high-level officials, high-level officers who are said to have abandoned their posts. If found guilty, they could get the death penalty. They could be executed under Iraqi law. But it is just the latest sign of the really sort of pandemonium, especially in those early days that we saw among Iraqi security forces. And we continue to hear reports of fighting still going on up in Beji for control of that oil refinery, the most important, the largest oil refinery up in the north of Iraq. And again, if that fell in the hands of ISIS, and ISIS forces were said to control parts of it earlier today, that would be another major blow for the government of Nouri al-Maliki.
Given this most recent example of disarray, given what's happening in Beji, we've been dissecting possible military strategies for Iraq. Looking at history, talking geography. You are there on the ground. You're talking to Iraqis. I imagine they're incredibly alarmed.
Look, there's obviously a lot of concern, there's a lot of uncertainty, but this is a place where people are used to that. They've been living like that for decades now. You know, in Baghdad, there's not a sense of impending catastrophe. Though ISIS forces and their Sunni supporters are said to be some 35 to 40 miles outside the city in the town of Baquba, where there has been fighting over the last 2 days. You know, in many ways, life in the city of Baghdad itself continues on. This is a predominantly Shia city. Volunteers have been called up, tens of thousands of volunteers. The feeling is that if forces were to get closer to Baghdad, they would start to engage with more motivated forces, highly motivated forces, Shia forces within the military who are in charge of protection of this city, and also a lot of these volunteers. You got to remember, there are thousands of volunteer Shia fighters, civilians who have been fighting in Syria for the last 2 years in support of the government of Bashar al-Assad against ISIS forces and others there. They have now heeded the call to return to Iraq to bolster the Iraqi army here. So there's not a sense of panic in this city because the feeling is, even though ISIS forces may be not too far off, what stands between them, where they are now, and the gates of Baghdad are a lot more motivated troops than what we've seen in some of these Sunni areas.
Anderson Cooper, we'll be watching tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern here on CNN, AC 360, live from Baghdad. Thank you.